And you're saying the 1969 oil spill was basically technology
Oh, we
from the
hadn't.
1940s.
We didn't have these redundant
Right.
safety systems. You're right. It's 1940s technology.
And the 1969 oil spill, it got such a splash of media attention, and it became such a beacon and a negative thing towards oil, and it just, and that's essentially when they shut down oil.
Yeah, right. And the industry has never really recovered in terms of public perception of it. And the other fact that we didn't hit is that in the Santa Barbara Channel, every 4 to 5 years, with that the equivalent of oil seepage of almost 270,000 barrels, or you're having the Valdez oil spill in the Santa Barbara Channel every 4 to 5 years.
I read Laddie Handelman, who's the other co-founder of SOS California, Stop Oil Seeps, was interviewed by Jim Buckley of the Montecito Journal, and we have that online if anyone wants a link to that, as well as this University of California, Santa Barbara study that was done by who, Bruce?
The Crustal Studies Institute at UCSB, Professor Bruce Lyondike and Ira Leifer, the two professors, did a long-term study looking at the platform Holly, which is the oil platform nearest UCSB, and the effects of its oil production on reducing the natural seepage in the vicinity of that oil platform. And what they found is more than a 50% reduction in the natural seepage in the vicinity of that oil platform over approximately 15-year period. And since then, that study was released in 1999, the reductions have even been greater than that, approaching 80% reductions within a mile of that platform.
That brings up a question that I want to ask in terms of the first question people will ask is, okay, if you have these safety precautions in place, but what about loading up platforms? Do you have to have them all over? Because if they're going to have to, reduce the pressure within a certain radius of the platform, will we see a big landscape of platforms if this actually goes through?
Let me jump in first, and then I know Bruce will come in. With the technology that we have today, Mark, most of the development, both in state and federal waters, would be done subsea with wellheads that you don't even see. They're on the ocean floor, and they would tie back to the existing platforms. So my guess is that you would not see any increase in, for example, platforms there in the Santa Barbara Channel.
When I read this study from the marine geologist, UCSB, and the first line, the first sentence, paragraph, says, next time you step on a glob of tar on a beach in Santa Barbara County, you can thank the oil companies that it isn't a bigger glob. And I read that and I thought, what is this, from Exxon? I mean, it sounds like an ad for, we can save you by drilling for oil. And there it is from marine geologists at UCSB. So it sounds like you have a lot of ammunition and a lot of information and studies to say, hey, this would work. This will alleviate this problem. So let's assume for the moment that someone's listening and maybe they've been anti-oil and they're afraid of oil leaks and spills, or what has the response and reaction been from groups like Heal the Ocean or all the environmental groups that not only want to save the ocean, but they just, as much as they want to save the ocean, they just want to be anti-oil anyway?
Well, I can jump in and just, as you know, we've done, I don't know, Judy would know, 4 or 5 different meetings with various groups ranging from 45 to 80 people. And I've been surprised, knowing the strong environmental bent in Santa Barbara, that the general and almost consensus reaction we get is that this is a no-brainer. Why aren't we looking at it?
And also, I've spoken with the legislative director for Environment California, which is one of the largest California environmental groups, and they oppose any new offshore oil development. And their legislative director was completely unaware of these UCSB studies that show the link between increased oil production in the channel and reductions in the natural seepage. So I think part of the problem is educating the community to some of the more recent studies and information about this linkage, about the possibility of actually reducing the natural oil seepage through increased oil production in the channel.
And I might again jump in, Mark. The thing that I think got Ladd so focused on this is that, he's looking at the fact that we've got soldiers dying in Iraq, and part of the reason for that is the securing an energy supply. When you look at what is offshore in the Pacific Outer Continental Shelf, that would be both state and federal waters all up and down the Pacific side of the nation. The Minerals Management Service, the government agency, estimates that today there are 10.7 billion barrels of oil and 21 trillion cubic feet of natural gas offshore California.
How many billion of what? Say that again.
10.7 billion barrels of oil.
And what is that? You know what that means to me? I don't know what that means. What does that mean? What does that mean? How long would that last in the United States?
I can give you a comparison.
Okay.
On the Atlantic Outer Continental Shelf, in other words, on the other side of the country, 2.1 billion barrels of oil, 31 trillion cubic feet of gas. In the Gulf of Mexico, 3.6 billion barrels of oil, 24 trillion cubic feet of gas. So in other words, in oil, offshore on the Pacific Outer Continental Shelf, 3 times the amount of oil that's in the Gulf of Mexico is sitting there.
10.7 billion barrels.
That corresponds to approximately over 4 years' worth of imports of oil to the United States from foreign sources.
Now that's an interesting analogy, because that was one of the responses, I think, with the interview with the Montecito Journal with Laddie Handelman, again, whose I guess his real name is Ladd, but people call him Laddie. And to me, Ladd is not even a real name anyway. What's his real name? Can we just find that out?
It's Laddie, as far as I know.
It must be short for something. Get him on the phone. But he had a very interesting interview, which I have a copy of it, with Jim Buckley of the Montecito Journal. And that was one of the things that he addressed, because a lot of people come up and say, well, we only have enough oil here to last the United States 28 days. It's not worth the time and trouble to do it. So you think by these reserves that the companies would come in and spend the money?
Oh, these are massive reserves, and they're sitting right there. You can just imagine the first thing you wouldn't have is all those tankers going through the Santa Barbara Channel, and you wouldn't have the accident that you had up in San Francisco.
Oh, that's actually why I brought up Laddie's interview, because that's one of the things he mentioned also at his house when he spoke, is that he feels that that's the real catastrophe waiting to happen to these oil tankers, and this is actually a better or safer way to do it.
Well, that is true, but in terms of real catastrophe, Bruce, you might just mention the potential. In fact, I saw that you had an earthquake in Santa Barbara a couple months ago. Bruce, you might just talk
We're having one right now, actually. Hang on a second.
Bruce, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, it turns out that there have been reports. I think some of the people who live in Santa Barbara are aware in 1925 there was a very large earthquake, and there were reports of increased oil seepage and tar on the beach and smells of oil. And there have been other. The 1971 earthquake in the L.A. area, there's an increase in oil seepage off of the coast of the L.A. County. So there is an association with seismic activity off our coast and increases of seepage and increases of oil and tar on the beaches. And 2 years ago, there was a significant increase in oil seepage, and they looked for any possible man-made sources and came to the conclusion that was just a natural change in the amount of oil seepage. So we have varying amounts, but if we do have more earthquakes, we can probably count on much more tar and oil seepage coming on our
just as
beaches.
a natural result.
That's right.
Of course, the argument would be that we build platforms and all this that could devastate that, but you're saying the safeguards will minimize that? Or?
There's always a risk, but as Jim said, and in the case of Santa Barbara, it's whenever there's even a small spill. People are aware there have been some issues and spills on land as well, but we're talking primarily about the technology for offshore oil here. And it's been well documented that since 1969, after the spill, there's been less than 1,000 barrels spilled in the Santa Barbara Channel, and that corresponds to less than 1 week's worth of natural seepage in our channel. So there's always a risk, but we believe it's quite small.